All right, how's it look to you?
Looks good. Go for it.
All right, so today we're going to talk to you all about Central Florida food forests. They're a topic that's like been gaining a lot more attention lately in horticultural circles. And so we're going to give you our version of it based off of the best management science and research out there from the university. And I mean, basically the idea of the food forest, there's two big things about it is just you want to be able to get passive food throughout the year. You let the plants do a lot of work for you and be able to harvest continually. And then the other aspect to that is you probably want to be having things that like will survive, and because it is so passive that you don't have to put a lot of inputs into. So we're trying to give you the best of the best. There's other things out there that we're going to be covering, but we'll give you a general idea of how to go about incorporating a system like this in your home, and then we're going to give you a brief survey of the best plants that are more suited for Zone 9B, or at least a warm version of Zone 9B, because some of them are a little cold sensitive. So with that, I will go ahead and pass it off here to Tia, and I'll sit in the background until we start our survey portion.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, John. And food forest is an exciting topic. I have a background in vegetable growing, fruit tree growing. I used to live in Hawaii. I got my master's degree in agriculture. Now living in Florida, this subtropical climate where we're just able to grow all kinds of things. So my name is Tia Silvesi, and I am the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent with the University of Florida IFAS Extension in Orange County. And I'm going to kind of be giving an introduction to food forests here. And I'll kind of give you some Florida friendly tips for your food forest to wrap up the webinar too later. So this picture here is the forest garden polyculture of Mayan lowlands. And so food forestry is not a new thing. It's actually a very ancient thing because, cultivating vegetables, in rows and raised beds, that requires a lot of inputs and a lot of work. So food forests are just like a natural way of growing food sustainably. Trees are a lot more sustainable than annual vegetables. And so the idea of the food forest is to have different layers of food being grown in a more like forest and self-sufficient environment. So you can see in this picture here, you can see the kind of different levels, and we'll show you a couple different pictures like this to get you started. Theirs is in meters and it has feet here, but the small stuff can be the house garden domestics like cover crops, flowers, herbs, and then you get into some ornamental shade and fruit trees at a little larger height. Going even bigger, you have your canopy type of trees. It can be palms, they can be legumes, they could be large fruit trees like mangoes, grow to about 100 feet tall. So ancient civilizations did this, especially in the subtropics and tropical regions of the world. And we can kind of go back to that indigenous and traditional agriculture and try to mimic it in our backyards, whether we're in the tropics, subtropics, or even in temperate. It's still the same concept that can be applied to any landscape, big or small. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a more simplified diagram here of the 7 layers of a food forest garden. So again, we want to plant a food forest to, use all the layers, maximize the growing space. Can you go back one slide, please, John? Maximize the growing space in your backyard. And so, you know, on the larger, we're going to have like the trees being like the big layer, you know, the canopy trees, the fruit and nut trees. We have the mid-story trees, you know, the other kind of dwarf fruit trees or so, a shrub layer. Think about like blue Florida climate, you know, they're about head high. And then the herbaceous plants. And then this one has the root crops, the rhizosphere. You know, number 6 is the soil surface. So like ground covers, like sweet potatoes. And then number 7, which is the vertical layer, like climbing vines. In the Florida native landscape, we have a lot of muscadine grape, as that's our vine layer, and they do make edible grapes. So that could be something you use in there. Other things like dragon fruit or passion vine, you can add that vine layer. And then some other food forest people also add an additional layer, like maybe layer 8 of mycelial layer or like mushroom crops, which would also, you know, work into a forest garden. But we're not really going to talk about that today. Today's presentation is kind of like a basic intro to, you know, Florida food forest gardening. So next slide. So one of my, you know, many plant endeavors was teaching permaculture, and this is a sample plant guild. So this is a plant guild, which just means a fancy term for a lot of companion plants planted together. And so kind of in the image in the center, you can see, you know, the number 1 is the mulberry tree. So this is the tallest, biggest tree, you know, that we're going to call the center of our plant guild. And then around that, we have some smaller things like some citrus, some turkey fig, blackberry, pineapple, guava, asparagus. Those are all things that, you know, might get a little smaller than a mulberry that you can plant around. And then also in the farther right picture, you can see some other ground covers that are type of edibles or herbs or support plants that might provide nitrogen, like the perennial peanut or yarrow, which is a medicinal herb. And it also has flowers that attract beneficial insects. You know, the lavender, the peppermint, pineapple, it's like a bromeliad. It can grow understory of, you know, trees. And strawberries, purslane, echinacea, lemongrass, these are all like nice little clumping, you know, perennials that can be planted around your yard. Now, this picture is kind of, you know, how you might draw it out, you know, from an artist rendition, but in real life, we kind of struggle with this concept in Florida specifically because our soil is very sandy. We have very poor soil, and this might be like too many plants too close together for them to actually produce, you know, healthy fruits in reality. So your spacing for your trees in your food forest, you want them spaced out a lot further than, you know, what's pictured here. This was just to kind of give you the general concept of the companion planting and the layers in the forest. But generally you want the trees to be spaced, you know, around 10 to 15 to 20 or even more feet apart, and then planting these other things in the middle. Next slide. Next slide, please, John. All right, great, thank you. So this is a mini food forest in a home garden, and this is for zone 10. So if you live in the Keys or Miami, these types of plants might work for you. The ulu, which is a breadfruit, you know, that gets to be a big plant. Also the pigeon pea, I talked about the nitrogen fixing peas, and those are good. Lemongrass and mint, the lilikoi or the passion fruit growing along the fence line. So think about, a typical backyard like this one, and how can you fit in the different layers of a large tree, a small tree, some ground cover, maybe some cassava or some Okinawan spinach or something to cover the ground. And then, of course, they use a mulch, which is Florida friendly, and log board from some local trees. So very sustainable type of backyard, and these plants will all work together to help each other grow. Hopefully they won't compete too much, and you should get lots of food out of a small area like this, even in a typical backyard. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Are you getting a delay, Tia?
Yes, I am. Oh, now it goes too bad.
Okay, hold on.
So the next slide that I'm going to talk about is, kind of another permaculture concept in like these zones of a food forest or a typical landscape. And so think about this, that applies more to like urban people who live in a smaller house. Maybe you just have a small yard, or you live on a quarter acre or a couple acres, because it's really hard to have like a huge forest like we would think of nature. But like next to your house, they can consider that zone 1, your primary like living space, places you're going to go visit a lot. And that's where you want to have the small and more intensive things like herbs and vegetables. Like moving out into zone 2, you'll have some more shrubs, like I mentioned, the blueberries, other types of berries, low maintenance like cassava, papaya, banana. Then zone 3, you can get into the fruit trees that you don't have to check on as often, a couple times a month, couple times a year. And then as you move out, like more native trees, native forests, timber product. And in this Gaia's Garden book, where this photo is from by Toby Hemingway, they say you should have a zone 5 too, that is like all native forests, wild area that is untouched, because we still want to grow something for our natural environment and, plants and animals in the area. Next slide. So just think about this when you're designing your own garden at home and your food forest, because you do want to plant the things that are more high maintenance close to your house, and the things that you can let go, let nature take care of, and survive off of rainfall alone further away. This is the last slide I'm going to talk about here, the components of a food forest. So, we're going to talk in detail right now, mostly about fruit and nut tree, like not nuts, but like fruit, avocados, mostly fruit tree type of things. We'll get into the vegetables and herbs and flowers a little bit. There's other things you should have, any type of sustainable homestead, sustainable landscape, Florida friendly landscape, which would be having a compost pile, and maybe worm compost, normal compost. Maybe you want to plant some functional plants like bamboo, which is, some of them are edible, but you might want to use them to make garden trellises, or maybe you have other species that you like to grow for timber, like maybe some cedar or something. And like a water feature, like a pond, help bring life to your garden. The frogs can eat a lot of your garden pests. And then the human functional, areas, you might want a little small lawn for your kids to play in, or pathways, or a little patio area to sit outside, or, butterfly garden, something like that. So there are many different components to a food forest other than the plants itself. And I just wanted to mention those, just for further thought. And so I'm going to turn it back over now to John to get into detail about some of the key plants we recommend for your food forest. Go ahead, John.
Okay. Yeah, we're just gonna give you guys all the basic survey of things that you can are at your disposal here in Central Florida. Uh, One note, though, before I proceed, is I just want you all to be aware that we're in this bizarre transition zone between temperate and tropical systems. And that can be advantageous because it brings us a lot of things that are sort of the best of both of those in many ways. But on the other hand, it can be quite challenging because things that grow in tropical systems really don't have a lot of defense against frost a lot of the time. And on the counter part of that is a lot of the things that grow more from temperate areas typically can't deal with the heat stress. If you think about some of the things that grow all like in the temperate area, but like are also still here in Florida, a lot of them are obligate to wet areas because they get water stressed. It's too hot for them almost anywhere else. So like red maples, sweet gums, things like that, they tend to be in wetter areas here. And it's kind of the same deal here that like these more temperate trees can be susceptible to just stress overall from the heat. So just keep in mind we're in zone 9B, but everything that feeds into these delineations is backward facing. This isn't a model. This is something that is based off of the past 25 or some odd years of data. And this was the last time they redid this was back in 2012, I believe. So that data is getting to be kind of old, and these lines they don't stay where they're at over time. And as many of you know that have lived in Central Florida for a long time, that we are currently in the midst of the winters becoming less and less like cold overall. So it's frosts in general are starting to disappear somewhat. All right, so we're going to work our way from the canopy trees all the way down to the ground covers and the vines. So the first ones that we're going to start out here are our tallest trees. And avocado is one of the big ones that produces a lot of food potentially. It's a tree. They get to be 30 feet high, sometimes even higher. Native range, there's three principal races of avocados: Guatemalan, Mexican, and Caribbean. The Mexican race has the most cold tolerance, so all avocados for Central Florida should at least be part Mexican in origin. And they tend to prefer well-drained sites. They're very similar in terms of their needs to citrus, actually. But they are, if you put them on sites that are too wet, they become susceptible to root rot. And the fruiting season or interval that you'll be able to get fruit from them depends highly on the cultivar that you select. But if you have more than one tree and you want to plant it so that you get a constant flow of avocados, you can potentially get them to grow from all the way, or have avocados coming in all the way from May through January. So here are some of the cold hardy Mexican race hybrids that are out there. Anytime you see these little apostrophes around the names of a particular type of species, that's just a selected cultivar typically. So some researchers out there did a bunch of work and they were able to patent it, at least at one point. And there was something unique about that plant that made it superior in some way. So we'll be seeing more of these here as we move along. But these are the ones we would probably recommend you all look into if you were curious in growing avocados here. So a word of warning, there is a big problem with avocados currently. There's a disease called laurel wilt. It's spread by a non-native insect, like a type of an ambrosia beetle. And it originally started out around, I believe, Charleston, South Carolina, or Savannah, Georgia. and it's spread all over the eastern United States ever since. It mainly affects a cousin of this tree called the red bay and the swamp bay, but it wasn't really something that was economically or important until it started getting to South Florida, where we have a lot of avocado trees. So it has been a persistent issue down there, trying to deal with this disease. So and it will affect homeowners as well. It's quite indiscriminate in terms of the trees that it affects. And for mature trees, it typically affects them the worst. All right, so mangoes. This is another one that's a tree up to 90 feet tall, 50 feet wide. Native range is Southeast Asia. It's in the same family as poison ivy and cashews. Exposure to the sap is generally discouraged since it has the same irritant in it called urushiol oil that's also in poison ivy. The fruit, this is another one with a potentially pretty long season. And you can probably get this one growing all the way from May to September for a lot of varieties. However, there are some exceptions. There are a few varieties out there that will flower either twice or during the winter. And so you can get them if you're somebody that comes down only part of the year during the winter, for example. Like there's a couple that are out there that might be good for you. They're not the highest quality mangoes, but some mangoes are better than no mangoes. So let's see here. Oh yeah, special considerations. This is another one that is the cold sensitive. So if just take a look, anything with this up in the corner is something that you need to be thinking about in terms of its sensitivity to cold. And I think I talked to you about the avocado, that there were a few races. So there's two main races of mangoes. There's Indian and Southeast Asian. And they have a little bit difference in terms of how they can be propagated, and then also the size of their fruit, and also their susceptibility to anthracnose. So that's the major disease for mangoes, and it's even up in Central Florida. And here's what it looks like. And like we see it pretty commonly in the plant clinic that we run for Orange County. But it can be on the foliage and the fruit. It will definitely ruin the fruit. There's a good chance that you've seen this if you buy them from the markets quite a bit, grocery stores. This is what eventually makes them go bad a lot of the time. So just keep in mind that the Southeast Asian varieties, which typically are your smaller sized mangoes, they tend to have a little bit more resistance to anthracnose. All right. Mulberry. This is a pretty cool one. There are a lot of different mulberries out there. They typically we're getting the smaller trees here now. You can even get dwarves of some of the other trees that we talked about for mangoes. But we're getting into that next tier of things that are about 30 or 25 feet tall. So mulberry, there are native species out there, but it tends to be more like a complex. There's quite a few at our disposal, and what's pretty nice about them is that they're very weedy. They don't take a lot of maintenance. And if you let them go, they'll produce like a really abundant fruiting crop, usually like once during the year in the early spring. However, there's a few varieties out there that are called like everbearing. So those can potentially extend your harvest throughout the year. So here's just a couple of the other species. The native species is called red mulberry. So this is an example of white mulberry, which there's actually a lot of inedible varieties out there. So you have to be aware of that. And there's multiple Asian species of mulberry, but this is one of them. So this is something that comes from Pakistan, India. So another thing to keep in mind is the sap can be irritating to the eyes. Most things in this family, the Moraceae, they have irritating sap. So that's just something to keep in mind. You might have to cut it back a good bit because it's pretty weedy. And that red mulberry is the only native one. Another thing to be aware of is that there is a paper mulberry out there. It's an invasive species, and it's a close relative. It's not in the Morus genus, but it's not edible, and probably not a good idea to eat it. I think that some parts of it actually are toxic. So just something to be aware of. It's persistent all over the place. You look in the sides of roads and ditches and stuff like that. That's where you'll find this a lot of the time. So Asian persimmon, Diospyros kaki, is another one that's in this 30-foot tall category. It fruits typically like at the end into the fall. So if you want some sense of seasonality for Florida, like this is a good one to go to. And they grow these nice orange fruit. And originally from Eastern Asia, but we have a native cultivar or native species here. And a lot of times these cultivars from Asia are grafted onto the native rootstock because they wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. There's too many other pathogens in the soil and nematode pressure that they don't have resistance to. So they are something that you need to pay. You really can't grow from a seed. You've got to get the grafted varieties. But once you're at that point, usually they've got very good survivability, and a lot of them do really well here in Central Florida. The big thing to keep in mind for these there are two different varieties, main types, I guess you would say. There are astringent and non-astringent cultivars. So this example right here, the one on the right-hand side is your astringent, and the left-hand side, this oranger-looking one, is the non-astringent. The astringents must be eaten while they're soft. Otherwise, they'll be full of tannins and they'll dry out your mouth when you try to eat them. It's actually a good trick if you want to feed one to somebody, or not saying I've ever done that to my friends in college or anything like that, but the non-astringents, on the other hand, they tend to be harder and crisper. They're almost like an apple, and the flavor is not as intense. It's a little more subdued, but they're still quite good. And so these are more temperate in terms of how they are really good, well suited for our region. So there's been a fair amount of research at the University of Florida trying to bring them here, checking out if they're commercially viable. Not really. They tend to get a lot of blemishes and things like that. They're still better to be grown in California for people that are trying to grow them commercially. But for homeowners, there's tons of varieties out there. All these cultivars, Fuyu and Matsumoto Fuyu, these are some of your non-astringent varieties, and Jumbo, Hachia, Ormond. I think Ormond is probably the best one for here. It grows into December into January, or the fruit are available at those points. And that there's not many things that you even here that grow into the winter like that in terms of trees for producing fruit. So now we're moving on to a member of the Rosaceae family. This is Loquat. So this is actually almost a tropical version of what we think of when we think of pears, plums, that type of thing. It's in the same family, like apples. All those are Rosaceae. They're in the rose family. So it's a small tree, another native to East Asia, likely originally from China. Fruiting season kind of depends on the cultivar again, but most of them will produce fruit into the spring. One of the cool things about them is they actually flower throughout the fall, the late fall, early winter, and then they will start fruiting pretty early on into the spring. So there are some cultivars that are better than others. Some of them are the other ones that might be more common out there might have been bred for other regions like Spain, which is more Mediterranean in climate. But these are some cultivars that have been tested here and do pretty well. So we will send the PDF to all of you at the end of the class here. So if you need to review any of these names that we're going over, like, they'll be available. Oh, another thing is, like a lot of the species that are within Rosaceae, they're also susceptible to fire blight. It's just a disease that starts out on the ends of branches and works its way down. You'll start seeing branches starting to die off, and usually it'll happen like kind of in a pattern, like one part of the tree. Just something to pay attention to. It's treatable. You could try and treat it with, to some extent, with copper fungicide, or if it's pretty bad, you just cut the branch back about 6 inches from where the last dead leaves are. And this goes for the other species within Rosaceae too, the peaches and the pears that we're going to go over. So carambola, or starfruit, this is a lot of things have, where you can produce a lot of fruit from individual trees here. There's typically 2 major blooms throughout the year, and it'll go April to May, and then maybe September through October. However, some maybe bloom all the way throughout the year, so they're kind of a weird one. But they can produce a lot of fruit. As the trees mature, fruit production will increase rapidly by about years 5 and 6 of it being in the ground. And you can typically get at that point 100 to 150 pounds worth of fruit. So these are, if you're looking for something to just really feed a lot of people and make your neighbors happy, if they happen to like starfruit, this is a big one that should be on your list. Some of the master gardeners regularly bring in starfruit whenever they come in for their shifts here at the plant clinic in Orange County Extension. And then, a tree that is 7 to 12 years old, it might produce 250 to 350 pounds of fruit per year. So pretty substantial amounts of fruit coming in on these plants. A big caveat though, they definitely require a lot of space and light in order to perform well. And it can be planted as an understory, but it probably prefers to be planted in the light a lot of times in order for it to reach its potential. After the fruit is picked, it won't increase, it won't mature anymore in sugar content. So when you pick them, the ideal point is when it's yellow and the tips of the sides of them are a little bit greenish in hue. So peaches, they're not just for temperate areas. We've had luck at the University of Florida in getting some of the very low chill varieties to exist here. I think it's a relatively novel thing, going back to the 50s or 60s. Like they weren't sure they could even get them to grow this far south, but they've managed through some breeding to make it happen. There are some downsides. The fruit are typically of smaller size, and they're usually not as great for shipping. But if you're a homeowner, that's really not too much of an issue for you in most cases. You can go pick them fresh right there. And they usually produce like in April to May. And because there's this concept of chill units, certain number of temperature hours below a certain temperature, I think it's 40 degrees or so, or 50, somewhere in that neighborhood. And these are the cultivars that require very low amounts of chill hours that are suitable here for Central Florida. As you can see, we're probably more in the 200 to 300, but we were looking, me and Tia, not too long ago, we were looking back at some of the records, And for, I believe, the winter of 2019 going into 2020, there were only like 80 chill hours. So, I mean, we say that they need 100, but a lot of these cultivars still produced. Then maybe they would have produced if they had a little bit more chill time, but it's still possible. Even though, and like I said, these graphs here, I mean, it can be subject to stochasticity, like just climate in general not being regular. So keep that in mind. You definitely want to be on the warm side when you select for peaches and other fruit here if they require chill units. Okay, the pear is another cool one we have for that can be grown here in Central Florida. There's a lot of different species of pears. I wasn't even aware of how many species there were until I started working on this presentation. But there are mainly two species that have been kind of interbred to produce the pears that we know. And all the Florida pears are products of those. So like we would just call them like the common European and common Asian pear. And so all of these are some combination of those. They've got hybrid vigor. They're able to endure a lot of the toughest environmental conditions that you throw at them. And the big condition that we have here in Florida is wetness, which by, vis-a-vis, like from wetness, there's disease. So that's the big issue. And like when you get that hybrid vigor for these, they're able to endure quite a bit of disease pressure relative to their parents. So here's what they would look like if you're planting them commercially in rows. They grow very, very upright. They're not very large, as you can see here when people top work them and keep them well pruned. But they've got an interesting habit to them. But yeah, there's only 3 cultivars that really do any well with some regular degree here in Central Florida. So another thing too to keep in mind, the fruit won't ripen on the tree. You've got to pick it when it looks mature, and then you can stick it in a bag or just give it some time, and then they'll start to ripen up. And another thing is, I think that there's also hard peaches and soft peaches. So that's something to keep in mind when you look at these particular cultivars, is that you want to know what you're dealing with, because some of them will not turn soft. They're made principally for dishes that you would be cooking them in. Okay. This is definitely an underutilized one. So acerola and Barbados cherry. It's a little cold sensitive, but it's more when it's a young plant. This one actually deals with the cold relatively well compared to some of the others on the cold list here. We're getting to some, smaller shrubs. So we're getting 15 feet high or so. Native range for this is the Caribbean Basin in South America. And this is one that responds well to pruning. That's why I threw a picture in here of it as a bonsai. Some people grow them that way, but it's definitely one that we could be using more here. It does have kind of a cherry taste to it. I would say it's distinct. There's something a little bit more tropical about the flavor of it. It's really high in vitamin C, ascorbic acid. So there were some interest in growing it for plantations back in the 60s and 70s, primarily for that. But now it's regrowing again in popularity just because it's so easy to grow. It's something that's just that homeowners are beginning to want more of. And this is one that's really well suited for our area. And I'm surprised we don't see more of. There are some issues with it, though. It can get root knot nematodes. It's kind of susceptible to those, and that nematodes they're not a super huge problem, but it's very dependent on where you're at in the landscape. They can be a problem, let's put it that way. And then also, it's susceptible. A lot of scales like it, scale insects, and the Caribbean fruit fly. So just things to keep in mind here. Ooh. All right, so papaya. So this is an interesting one. It's a very strange quote unquote tree. It's technically and botanically, from a botanical perspective, it's a modified vine, and it's evolved to kind of act like a tree. If you were to cut one of these open, it doesn't form branches. It only forms large leaves. It doesn't look like what other plants that are technically called trees look like on the inside. And so this is a pretty bizarre plant from a physiological standpoint. It's also an interesting one from like a history standpoint here. We break off things between considered native and non-native based on whether they were here in 1492 or not. And this is one that was here in Florida at, before that point, but we know that it came from Central America originally. So is it considered a native? Yeah, it's considered a native here, but was it here before humans? It wasn't. So it is one of these weird exceptions when we go and look at the books, the literature out there in terms of breaking things down as native and non-native. But I mean, there's a reason why it's everywhere, why it's here. It's a very well-performing plant. Once it becomes mature, it'll start producing fruit year-round. It'll begin 9 months after planting, and if it'll keep producing generally all the way through to January, February outdoors. Something that's other thing about it that's kind of weird is there's 3 genders. There's male, female, and hermaphrodite. So the male plants, like, they can't produce fruit. They've only got the male parts, the flowers. And the female, we've got some examples here. They kind of won't produce really good, viable fruit unless they're fertilized somehow. So this is an example on the right-hand side of what the female looks like. They tend to be much more round-shaped, and the pulp just doesn't mature correctly on the inside. It's just really not something that is great for eating. So commercially, most papaya fields that are out there trying to, being grown for profit, it's all hermaphroditic plants. Actually, what they'll do is they'll plant 3 seeds per hole, and then they'll just see, as the trees mature, which ones turn into the hermaphrodites based on their flower characteristics, and they'll cull anything else that isn't the hermaphrodite plant. The fruit are susceptible to animals, birds, fruit flies. There's a papaya wasp out there too. So, I mean, they're a relatively low maintenance plant, but there are other things out there that want to eat them because they're just out there unmolested a lot of times. But you have to be aware that there are a lot of other things that would like to have sweet papaya as well. And in some places, the dishes that they grow them in, they'll collect them while they're green and eat them that way. But I guess the mature plants and the mature fruit, the color and sweetness of the fruit depends heavily on the cultivar of the papaya that is growing. So that's something to keep in mind, that there's just a lot of different variety out there as well for these. And a lot of people might have only experienced 1 or 2 types of papaya, but definitely something you should look into if you intend to grow them, like what type of papaya you might want to have in your landscape. Ooh. Elderberry. So this is a good one. If you happen to live on a wet site, it grows as a shrub. It only gets to be about 12 feet high. And it's something that's found throughout much of the eastern United States. We've got a few different species here in Florida, but the main type here is the canadensis here in North America. And they've tried to kind of make it a little more uniform for, I guess, production. People are looking at it as a underutilized crop, potentially, something that could be viable, but specifically because it can grow on such, on bad sites a lot of the time. However, there have been some issues with growing this plant. The fruit and flowers, like they can be used for wine, preserves, tinctures, teas. But if you like, the other parts of the plant are considered to be potentially toxic. And there was an incident where they believe, I think this was back in the 70s or 80s, where it was processed somewhere in California, and it ended up being like a different species of elderberry, Sambucus, that was still, other parts of it were toxic. And so people have been hesitant to grow it here, like because of that. In European countries, it's much more pervasive. They don't have as many issues with toxicity with the species, well, subspecies that they have there. And so, but the fact that it's so high in antioxidants and other like medicinal properties, like it supposedly has some antiviral activities and lots of phytochemical compounds, so antioxidants. There has been renewed interest in this for that, and the fact that it can endure such wet sites that a lot of plants can't deal with. Yeah, and also it deals with shade pretty well, which compared to a lot of the others, this one is a great mid-story. I mean, if you really want to get to the archetypal food forest type plant, this one is very much fits the mold of something that can be grown around other plants, and without too much, without too much hassle on your part, the homeowner, to deal with. It easily propagates. It's very weedy, and so that's something that is good, because you can potentially start out with just one or two plants, and if you get them to a decent size and start growing them from like hardwood cuttings, that's the easiest way to grow it. So even in the EDIS document that's out there on this, they said hardwood cuttings are the way to go. They're better to go than seeds. So the banana. So we're considering this one a small tree, even though it is closer in relation to grass or I get, bamboo or palms. It's fit more in the clade with them, but it looks like a tree. It's just a tropical tree. It's a little different. So we're considering it in that realm. It's native to Southeast Asia. It's actually a complex of different species, as you can see here. This is where the two principal species were that have put their genetics towards what we think of as the modern banana. But there were probably several species in actuality that contributed to the bananas that we know today. And there's tons and tons of cultivars out there. We're really limiting ourselves if we just want to think of the Cavendish. So, and actually this tree here is a dwarf Cavendish. And the Cavendish, by the way, is the what we think of as the standard eating banana that is grown throughout much of Latin America and shipped here. It's and that's why it was selected, was because it ships well. And I'm going to tell you right now that you haven't lived until you've tried some of these other bananas that are out there. And I would say this for mangoes and some of these other fruits that we're covering here, that if you're just going based off of what you get from the supermarket, it's really a poor descriptor in many cases of what these plants taste like when they're at their prime. And the cultivars, the Cavendish is really not that great of a cultivar. They actually use it for animal forage, like feeding animals, like in the countries that can produce a lot of different bananas that don't need to ship as far. So, and well, I'll point out a couple here that are widely available in Florida. Oh, and another point I wanted to make is that like they're easy to propagate. You only need the corym, which is the bottom of these. They sprout from one another through rhizomes underneath the ground, and if you can just move them with these parts right here. You can chop the tops of them off, and they will come right back, as long as they're put on a decent spot that they find agreeable. I guess another thing too is when you pick them out for certain sites, is the big thing to keep in mind is that they are heavy feeders. A lot of times they like rich soil. If you just stick these on like dry, sandy sites, the bananas might struggle a good bit. So they definitely need to be somewhere. They can deal with a little bit of shade too. They're mid-story, like we've talked about. Do they like full sun? Certainly. If you give them lots of sun and lots of fertilizer or lots of compost, that type of thing, they'll respond very favorably to it. So here's some of the other cultivars that I wanted to point out here. This one's called Apple. It has an appley taste to it, very unique. But I mean, it's like almost if an apple and a banana had a baby. Some of the things that you'll pick up when tasting this. Maybe this is a class we can do someday. Basically, like have one of the extension agents come out and be like a sommelier, but for some of these crazy fruits that are out there. Let's see, next one. This one's called Ice Cream. It's also called Blue Java. And surprisingly, it kind of tastes like, not so surprisingly, it kind of tastes like vanilla ice cream. So another good one that is readily available, very common here and well known for people that like are in the know for these types of things. Ooh. Okay, here's another one. We're getting into like the small shrubs here. And this is Roselle. So it's also called red sorrel or Jamaican sorrel or Florida cranberry. It's fast growing. It's a very close relative of okra. It's the hibiscus genus. And plants typically take 4 to 6 months to mature. And it's very similar to okra or eggplant in terms of its life cycle, that 4 to 6 months, and its size. One plant can grow as much as 12 pounds worth of fruit under the right conditions. And the plants begin blooming when the days begin to shorten. And the big thing that people focus on for harvesting on these are these calyces. The part that kind of supports the flower once it were to come out. And they have a very cranberry-like taste to them, and they can be used in place of cranberries a lot of the time for many dishes. And another cool thing about them is they have 9 times the amount of vitamin C as oranges. So they're very nutritionally, they're a pretty awesome plant in many regards unto themselves. And yeah, they can be prepared all different kinds of ways. You can make jam out of them, preserves. In other countries, they are made into an infusion that's called carcade. So maybe I'm saying that wrong, carcade, but I don't know. The leaves are also used in dishes. In Myanmar, they're often cooked with garlic. In India, they're mixed with lentils a lot of time. They're used in a lot of different curries and that type of thing. But throughout much of the tropical world, they're used quite a bit, particularly the young leaves. So there's another one out there that's a close relative called cranberry hibiscus. So it's another hibiscus, and it's a small shrub. It's kind of the same deal. It just has this more unique color. It's red all the way throughout, burgundy kind of colored. It's originally from Asia or Africa. They don't know exactly. It's probably actually a hybrid between a couple of species from what I was able to look up. And yeah, it's the same deal. It kind of gets to be this size as the roselle. But the thing about this is it doesn't grow the calyx that is good for eating. It's most of the things that people eat are just the young leaves. You can just throw them in salad or stir fry them, that type of thing. So it's sometimes called false roselle because it bears superficial similarity, and it's still edible, but like it doesn't produce those calyces. Let's see. Yeah, the flowers can be used for teas and other drinks, and they can contribute color to. They're more for contributing color than taste. They don't have a ton of taste to them, but you can mix them in. I think in Central America, it's used to make purple lemonade. If you can mix it with limes and lemons and other things to make a lemonade infusion. Ooh. Sugarcane. So this is a tall ground cover grass, and originally it's from New Guinea, like in that region, Indonesia, and you can harvest it from mid-October through mid-March typically. So like I guess this would be typically when it's not growing, it's somewhat dormant during those seasons. It's actually a hybrid of multiple species. This is one of these complex ones that there were a lot of things out there that were similar, and they've been able to create better crops by interbreeding them together. And it's actually the world's largest crop by production quantity. 1.8 billion tons were grown throughout the world in 2017. So it's even hard to imagine like how big that would, the mass of that amount of sugarcane. But that's, I mean, they grow so much of it in Brazil that they can use it as gasoline. So it's a pretty intensive plant for a lot of the world, and intensively grown anyway. There's lots of cultivars available. They come in different colors if you go looking for them, different advantages and disadvantages. There's a lot of research that goes into them down in South Florida. I think Florida produces 21% of, well, I guess, let's see here. I think it's 21% of the sugar in the country comes from the sugar cane. And I think it's something like Florida generates like 40% or 50% of the sugar cane for the country. So, I mean, that's quite a bit of acreage, and I guess a lot of agricultural power that's going into this plant. And so it can be harvested too for the homeowner as well. Yeah, but I guess it's susceptible to quite a few pests and disease. It gets rust quite a bit. But here's the good thing about growing things in food forests is that you're not growing monocultures a lot of the times. The plants that you're growing they're growing up with a lot of other types of plants. So that doesn't give lots of pests and pathogens easy avenues to spread throughout, like what happens when you grow in fields of monocultures. So typically, you're in a little bit safer stance growing a plant here and a plant there. And if you lose one, what is one plant? If you do run into one of these issues, you just switch up your cultivar and plant another one that you think might be more less susceptible to whatever that you had the issue with. So this is more of the integrated approach that we try and advocate for. It's a little bit less industrial, but for the homeowner, this works to your favor in many ways. So here's another one that's kind of a vine. It's kind of a cactus. I mean, this is an interesting one. It's a succulent technically, but it grows like a vine, and or a dragon fruit, or pitaya, and native range. It's from the tropical Americas, and it has a fruiting season that goes typically, like I guess when you would say is the growing season, June through November. And so doesn't have a super strong flavor. And even though that looks like the color can be quite intense from them, but it's definitely something that does pretty well here. I know quite a few people that have had success with this one. And so it's just one of these that can fit into that vining category that we were talking about. So ginger, another ground cover, grows to about 3 feet in height, originally from Asia, grows best in partial shade, and it likes to have organic matter when you place it in a bed. As opposed to here, things are so sandy. If you can, and we don't really, for a lot of instances, like to advocate like planting things with amendments, but this is one of these that grows really well with amendments. I mean, and I'm talking specifically about trees. Once you get into more active gardening, that's where we're getting to with these ground covers and smaller plants. This one responds really well to modified soil environments if there's organic matter available. So, like I said, it grows pretty rapidly. And then I guess, for a lot of things that are out there, you let it grow all season and then you harvest it in the fall or whenever that you notice the tops start dying, potentially from the cold here in Central Florida. So there's a cousin of this. It's still in the ginger family, and it is called turmeric. So it's the same family as ginger. They both grow from their rhizomes, and then you stick the rhizomes in the ground. Here's what they look like at harvest. You can also eat the rhizomes. It's the edible part. It's actually, the rhizome is a modified subterranean stem. So you're actually eating the stem of the plant, not the root, which is kind of weird to think about with these plants. The roots store well under freezing or pickling. If you pickle them, the flavor is going to be quite different. And the culinary use is going to change with that. Same with ginger. Historically, it was used as a dye. They think that it started out as a dye before it moved over to something more for food and for alternative medicine. There's still a lot of research ongoing with turmeric and the effects it might have medicinally. They haven't found a ton of strong evidence that it really does a whole lot. The ginger that we mentioned before, actually, they have linked pretty well to being able to deal with nausea, indigestion. So that's something that is pretty good. But overall, I guess it's called the curcumin, the compound that scientists are interested in right now. There's still a lot of things up in the air whether how effective it is. Ooh, pardon me. Sweet potato. So we're getting all the way down to the low ground covers now. This is still a vine, but this is one that tends to grow more on the ground. It'll grow up trellises and things like that. So it's a member of the morning glory family. And this is a heck of a world traveler as a plant. I think morning glory tends to be a New World type of family, like they tend to be over on this side of the globe. But prior to recorded history, this is one of the ones that showed up that they know for a fact was from Central America, South America originally, but they found it all the way out in distant portions of Polynesia. So pretty cool that this thing migrated quite a bit before recorded history. And then after the Europeans got a hold of it, it started spreading all throughout the globe. And, it's used quite heavily here in the southeastern United States. So once things start warming up, that's typically when people will put these into the ground, and then you can harvest them typically 120 days after they've been placed in the ground. Yeah, and then or until they'll tolerate, they can tolerate frost below ground, but they'll start to die out. There's a ton of cultivars available. We tend to think of the orange cultivars as the main type, but there are a ton of others out there. They range in color from white to yellow, orange, and purple to blue. So there's a lot of cool ones out there at your disposal. Differing, levels of quality, of course. But yeah, it used to be a lot more commonly in Americans' diet. When I was looking at this, a cool fact, the average American eats about 4 pounds of them per year. But back in 1920, the average American ate about 30 pounds worth of sweet potatoes. So I don't know if they're gaining popularity or not, but that's pretty weird how certain, maybe that's just vegetables in general, that they're out of favor in terms of people's diets. But definitely something that can be utilized more. It grows super easy. The plants at the top die off, and then you just harvest these. There's a curing process to them, which scares a lot of people. It's really not that complicated. It's kind of optional in some senses. It's more of, if you want the plants to be the best disposed as possible to being able to survive for a long time, what you do is you stick them in an area that's not wet, that's about 85 to 95 degrees, and at 90 to 95% humidity, and you leave them there for 5 to 14 days. So at that point, they'll heal over if there's any wounds on them, that type of thing. And if you want to store them, the ideal storage conditions are somewhere in about 50 degrees. They can store for, the cured sweet potatoes can store for up to 13 months. Okay, Okinawan spinach. So this is one that comes up quite a bit. It's a ground cover. It's not actually a spinach. It's something else. Let's see here. So it's originally from East Asia, but it produces these edible leafy greens. So if there's something that you want to be able to consistently get and put in smoothies or curries or that type of thing, this is one it's out there that is definitely probably not used enough. The people that are in the know about this one. It's regularly used by certain people that are big into permaculture, but it's getting renewed popularity. If you look at some of the old McCubbin books, it was one that he had listed. There is a slight health risk with some of these alternative spinaches, I guess you would call them. It's something to do with like the enzymes. If you have weird liver, any interesting liver problems, it can contribute to more liver problems. So something to keep in mind with some of these. But outside of that, I don't want to scare you away from it. It's a perfectly fine plant. If you want something that produces green, lettuce-like or spinach-like material for eating. So passion fruit. This is a super intense vine plant. There's actually many species of it. Passiflora edulis is just the main one that we think of in terms of the one that produces it's for food consumption. There's a couple that can contribute into this, and they do hybridize like a lot of the things in here. People have picked out the best things for eating there's been people up to this that have been smart people that have been up to this for a long time. And even before we were doing this on a scholarly level, people have been picking out the best plants for a very long time. And this is no exception here. Originally from South America, typically I think more northern South America, but it's one that can be pretty aggressive. A good site, the vines can grow very aggressively. So be careful where they're put in the landscape. I'm talking from personal experience. They started growing up the side of my parents' garage and onto the roof, and they weren't happy about it. So it's not there anymore. I had to take that thing out of the environment because it was doing too well. So, like I mentioned, we tried to pick out a lot of the plants that are the best of the best here and are low maintenance in terms of having to deal with survivability issues. This is on, if it's in the right spot, you'll have more problems with it doing too well. So a lot of things in here are kind of the same thing. So anyway, it is a little bit drought sensitive, which can be an issue for sandy sites here in Florida. Always an issue. Depending on where, if you know that you're on a sandy site, just be aware it's going to take a little bit of irrigation love to keep it going. But yeah, the fruit are quite delicious. They're added to a lot of different drinks. They have a very distinct flavor to them. They're added. They can be added to a lot of different dishes, like in South American eating. There are mousses. There are things, puddings, things like that, where this is added to. And they're very easy to grow from seeds too. If you want to do your own seed preservation or seed hanging on to your own seeds, Tia does a class on that, how to store them and use them later on. This is a great one for that. So, and then, people will just stick them straight up into their drink cups. So not that I would know anything about that or about drinking, caipirinhas with passion fruit in Brazil or anything, but they're quite tasty if you ever have the chance. So I think I'm going to pass it back off here to Tia here to round out the rest of our time on this class.
All right, great job, John, sharing all those cool plants with everybody. I'm really excited. I got to get them all for my garden. Well, I have a lot of them already, but and we do have an extensive plant collection here at our extension center. We're located by the Orlando International Airport on South Conway Road. We can put a link to it in the chat, and we have guided garden tours and plant propagation classes and stuff you can come to. But as I mentioned earlier, my name is Tia Solvesi, and I am the Florida Friendly Landscaping Agent for the University of Florida Extension here in Orange County. And I just wanted to leave you all off with a couple tips for taking care of your Florida friendly food forest. So this little infographic here is a kind of representation of some of the practices and principles we advocate for, which include, planting the right plant in the right place. So that means, if you live in Miami, you can plant coconuts and breadfruit, but if you're in Tallahassee, some of those plants might not grow for you. And also just in your yard, we mentioned the bananas and the elderberry, they kind of like wet organic soil, whereas the citrus and the avocados, they like it more high and dry because they're prone to fungal problems. Watering efficiently is our principle number 2. So using things like micro irrigation, fertilizing appropriately. A lot of these plants have special fertilizer needs, using mulch, planting flowers. So it's, beneficial for the beneficial insects to come and visit your garden. And we have a EDIS publication on Florida Friendly Edible Landscaping. You can just Google that, Florida Friendly Edible Landscaping, and it will come up. So next slide. So one of the things I mentioned is mulch, and part of, working towards a sustainable homestead, you want to conserve water and you want to feed your plants. So organic matter, whether it be a couple leaves, sprinkled on your loofah and Seminole pumpkin and holy basil seedlings, that will help them grow. It will prevent the weeds. You know, if you have a traditional vegetable garden, here we use mulch that we got from a feed store, you know, just to line the pathways. And if you're growing fruit trees like this picture here from Festival Park Community Garden, you know, it's good just to apply a layer of mulch, like hardwood mulch, like 2 to 3 inches at the base of those trees to keep them healthy, to help conserve water, and just to make a good environment for them. Next slide. So another Florida-friendly principle is to attract wildlife. And so you can plant herbs and flowers, wildflowers. You know, basil is a flowering herb, like the Spanish tarragon in the middle. These are all, you know, they can be planted in your food forest. If you have a patio garden, you can grow them in a grow box, and they will help to attract the beneficial insects to your garden and keep away the pests with the pollen and nectar their flowers provide, and the kind of stinky, you know, essential oils that their leaves give off. So just plant lots of herbs and flowers everywhere, all along your garden, to fill in those little spaces in between your fruit trees. Next slide. Next is using efficient irrigation. So we get pretty good rainfall here in Florida, about 52 inches a year, which kind of corresponds with 52 weeks in a year. However, we get most of it in June, July, and August and September, which leaves us a dry season, you know, usually January, February, March, April, May. So during that time, you may need to supplement. Some trees like citrus are sensitive and the drought will negatively affect them. Rosemary is more drought tolerant, but we're still using this little micro spray here in the pot to keep it irrigated, because container gardens do require more water. The citrus tree, we're using a little drip irrigation, you know, with a couple rings around the stem here, and the water should actually go out a little bit further, you know, that is showed here. Next slide. Like this drip line here in the picture. So that's where you want the water and the fertilizer to be, because that's where the main feeder roots are of your trees. So that's where you want the water and fertilizer, not all right up against the base of the plant, but kind of spread it out right along the drip line of the plant. And so be mindful that some things grow like weeds in your garden. In my garden, the banana grows like a weed, the turmeric grows like a weed, but I kind of have a wet, shady, you know, type of soil. If you're more high and dry, maybe the sugar cane is going to grow like a weed for you, or the avocado trees. So just be mindful that all these fruit trees, they may need a special type of fertilizer, especially when they're putting on fruits and flowers. The 3 numbers, the NPK, you know, nitrogen is good for leaves, but the phosphorus and the potassium is good for the root and the flower development and the fruit development too. So you can ask us, send us an email if you have a question about fertilization. And there are UF EDIS documents that provide this information. So you can look up like University of Florida, you know, mango care for home gardens, and it will tell you detailed recommendations on that. Next slide. And so these are just some other fruits here. You know, this class was just a overview of food forest. We wanted to give you an introduction and get you excited about all the cool things that you can grow here. But we could spend a whole nother hour, you know, going over a lot of other plants. You know, pictured here, we have a calamondin. We have the jaboticaba, the Brazilian grape, those purple things. Pineapple grows really well here, sun or shade. Lemongrass is another Florida-friendly, you know, drought-tolerant plant, as well as these olives here. And so there's just a lot more species we can talk about. And so that will have to be, you know, kind of a part 2 later on. So thank you, John, and we'll let you wrap it up with the last slide.
All right. Yeah, I guess we just want to put our plug in here for us to keep providing all these programs for the general public. I mean, please go ahead and check out our the survey. There's this QR code here. We've also provided a couple times, I think, in the chat. We'll provide it again. Tia's popping it up right now into the chat. We just want to go ahead and gauge if you guys have learned anything, and if there's anything else that is useful that you want to comment on in terms of what type of program and that type of thing. That's it. Just really something. It'll take you probably less than 2 or 3 minutes to fill out. But it helps us a lot, and it makes our bosses happy to see that we're getting input from the public, like all of you here, and we're very. It was nice having such a very large, well-attended class. This was perfect timing to do it, I think, because of where we're at time-wise, that people could fit it into their schedule. So, and I think it's a certain, relevant, prescient course for this time here right now. So, yeah, with that, I mean, I'm moving on from Orange County soon. I won't be around. I'm transferring over to Palm Beach County. But Tia will be here. She's long been the one that's been holding it down on the edible plant front for Central Florida before she was even extension agent. And so I'm looking forward to how that develops and to be seeing more programming that's coming out from up here, because this is something that I like a whole lot too. When I'm not busy working, doing other jobs or parts of the office work, I really enjoy going out and gardening and applying the principles that from our classes here. So it's definitely a labor of love. And so I'm glad there's so many people out there too that enjoy it. And that's why we're here. We want to be a resource, and come hang out with us at Extension. If you got any questions, there's always the plant clinic as well. And then, you can reach out to me and Tia. Our email addresses are here. But yeah, Master Gardeners and the extension agents, that's what we're here for, is to if you guys have any problems, if you've got any questions regarding what we were going over in the class. But outside of that, I hope everybody has a nice, end of the year holiday season. And yeah, I guess, anything else, Tia?
There were a couple questions in the chat box, if you want to take some now. Yeah,
let's go for it. We got, for anybody that wants to stick around, we can answer some questions.
Yeah, and just fill out the survey before you leave by the QR or the link in the chat. So question number 1 is, how dense do you plant your food forest?
Well, I mean, like we kind of mentioned there, for that probably things being a little bit further apart is better. If certain plants do really well, there's nothing that's going to stop them from expanding into those spaces with time. So, I mean, it kind of is just really dependent on the plant. This would be more of an advanced type of question for sure, because you could start getting into principles of design and even combining aspects of permaculture design with landscape architecture and that type of thing. It kind of depends what you want to do. It goes back to the homeowner, but a lot of people don't want things to look too overcrowded, but some people don't care about that. They'd rather just have more plants that are producing more food until they start killing each other when they crowd each other out, that type of thing. So this is definitely more of an advanced thing. You just need to look into the size requirements, the space requirements for a lot of these plants, and then play it by ear. And a lot of this is going to be experimentation on the part of the person that's doing it. Sure, and you can always turn to, we can try and help you out the best that we can. And there are other, maybe talking to other people that that have tried similar things out in their home environment. Florida Fruit Growers Club, I think, or what is Central Florida Fruit Growers? They might be a good place to go to too.
Yeah, and the permaculture groups.
So yeah, it's going to be a little bit of trial and error as well. So let's see, what else do we got here?
There's just a question from George. You talked about understory and mid-story. Can you please briefly touch upon the layering?
Yeah, or I guess the different stories or canopies. I mean, these are some of these terms are more technical than others, but I mean, you've got your like in ecology, you've got your plants that can only tolerate full exposure, grow up high, and then you've got your mid-story plants, mid-canopy plants that like can deal like with low light conditions and might be trying to grow into the light that's available. I mean, the ones that we picked out for the mid-story, they can tolerate it to some degree, even though some of them might respond really well if you put them in full sunlight, like the carambola. It can persist and still produce a lot of fruit in the shade a little bit. But if you were to turn that tree into a canopy tree, it would produce even more. It just depends on your objective. Maybe you don't need that many carambola fruit. So, I mean, this is getting more into the art side, I guess, like of this. It's like moving past the science a little bit into the art. And like there are other systems out there, agroforestry, for example, where you're growing that get more into this type of a topic, where you're actively growing some trees for different uses. Like you might have a canopy plant, then you might have a mid canopy plant, and then like cacao or something that likes the shade. So chocolate plants, they don't grow particularly well in full sunlight. A lot of instances, like so you have something that you grow over it called mother of cacao. So this is you just got to pay attention to what can tolerate that and where do these things fit into each other. And then you might even find that like if something's not working, you can always change it up a little bit too.
Yeah, that's right. You kind of experiment and see how it does in your landscape. And then some things might want to grow like too much, like John is saying, your star fruit might want to get too big, and maybe you decide you want to prune it back a little bit so it stays more small and compact in a way that you can manage it and utilize all the fruit. Like I know in my backyard, I have native oaks and pines, and then in the understory, then I'm growing my bananas and star fruit and papayas, and they do okay kind of at the mid-level and, with the gingers and stuff as the ground cover.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think right now we're just trying to give you all the tools to think in these layers and like giving you the plants that you can throw in for these different layers. But it's going to be up to the user to figure out how you want to do that. And then like, even for us, like we have an idea of what goes where, but it doesn't always work out. So it's just something it's trial and error. And I think that, Tia's had a lot of trial and error. Like it's pretty impressive, like setup that she's got. And I mean, we try to do it to some extent with our gardens too at the extension center. So, I mean, and maybe that's something that we'll keep expanding on too, like on site. So.
Yeah, that's right. We keep adding new fruit trees. We have the sugar cane, we have turmeric, we have that Barbados cherry at our extension center, as well as, a Florida apple, which doesn't really produce well. And then we're just added some peaches and nectarines that we got from A Natural Farm out in Groveland. So yeah, just try. And then the other thing is seeing what you like to eat, because like some of those spinaches are like chaya, it grows like a weed, but like, do you really like to eat it that much? And maybe you keep one or two around for some survival food, but you still grow some Swiss chard or kale because the flavor is a little bit better.
Let's see. You've got a question. I think this is more for you, Tia. What do you think of as the number one issue you see beginner permaculturers or permaculturettes run into?
Okay, well, one thing in Florida that we're dealing with is very poor soil. And so like in that diagram that I showed in the beginning from one of my permaculture students, they have this, beautified like mulberry tree next to an orange tree, with a vine growing up and all producing fruit. Like that's not very realistic in Florida because our soil is poor. It doesn't hold a lot of nutrients like a clay or volcanic soil would. So here, you want to give things more space so that they have room to grow. And then you might want to need to baby them, give them a little extra irrigation in the summer. I mean, not in the spring during our dry season. Check out if they have specialized fertilizer needs, like some mangoes or something. You might need to give them a little fertilizer to get a real good crop so that you're making the most out of your effort. And the other thing is don't grow plants from seed. For some plants like avocado are usually grafted, mangoes are usually grafted, pigeon peas and hibiscus, that kind of stuff you can grow from seed. But you want to get a named like grafted variety of some of these your main fruit trees. If you're only going to plant one mango and one avocado, and that's going to be like your food forest, go ahead and spend the money, get a named cultivar. Don't just grow avocado from California that grows from seed that may or may not grow or may not be a male or female or type A or type B. So do some research and get some name varieties and plant them up in your yard and take care of your plants.
Yeah, you generally have to pay a little bit more to invest in those good plants, but I mean, from my experience, they've been pretty worth it to get those good cultivars. And I mean, it depends where you get them from, but a lot of them they'll cost you anywhere from like $80 to $30 in terms of something that's like 3 to 5 gallon. So just depends on the plant. And then you can even start getting advanced and getting the more than one different cultivar, extend your harvest of certain things, like getting those avocados that are in mango seasons. If you have one tree that is early season and another that's late season, you've just doubled your season effectively, like for those plants. So, I mean, use biology of the plants to your advantage. So just things to keep in mind. So, all right. Do you see any other questions on here, Tia?
No, I don't.
Okay. I guess, thanks everybody for dropping in. I hope you all have a wonderful end of your year. And we'll send you an email to follow up here. And we hope to see you down into the future on more of our classes. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, sounds good. Bye-bye.